Welcome to the Funnel Reboot Podcast with your host, Glenn Schmeltzley. Let's get into today's show.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot. Whether you are catching us from some of the countries where we're most listened to in North America, or Germany, India, UK, Poland, France, Spain, Singapore, Belgium, I'm just glad you're here. Let's get straight into today's show. This is the second of two shows on doing data-driven marketing in a way that respects user privacy. Now, no matter how much we crave in data, there will be fewer ways to capture it soon. At time of recording, Google says Chrome will stop supporting third-party cookies in 2024. Our choice should not be to switch to other forms of tracking, but whether we'll go into this privacy-centric era voluntarily or out of necessity. Having less data on our customers may sound like it's bad for business, but a recent book argues that it's actually necessary if we're going to maximize long-term ROI. A book called The Privacy-Centric Marketing Organization was co-written by a group who work together at InfoTrust. And one of those people is today's guest. My guest holds a bachelor's degree from the University of South Carolina, and he's currently at the forefront of giving tag architecture solutions to major corporations. He specializes in the business development and implementation of tag governance processes with the help of InfoTrust's own Tag Inspector product. His expertise in both sales and marketing strategy, web analytics, and tag management lets him focus on educating clients about what they need to know on proper tagging and user behavior analysis. Today we're going to catch up with him in Barcelona, so let's go hear from Lucas Long. Lucas Long, welcome to Funnel Reboot.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm really glad to have you. Today we're talking about a book that you got to be the co-author of. Can you please tell me the whole title of the book?
Yes, the book is Crawl, Walk, Run, Becoming a Privacy-Centric Marketing Organization.
Right. And now there is actually two books here that InfoTrust has authored. So that Crawl, Walk, Run was by itself the title of an earlier book. Let me see when that was published. That was 2020.
Correct.
But this book is different. So I remember Crawl, Walk, Run to be largely about digital analytics maturity.
Exactly. Yep.
So take me through what this book does that is different.
Yeah, so the first book was about exactly that, analytics maturity, how organizations can better their analytics maturity. This newer book, focused on privacy-centric marketing, is really an evolution of that. So with the changes in the privacy landscape and changes to consumer expectations resulting from the privacy topic, how should organizations really be approaching that with the data that's being collected and used for analytics, for activation, and really across the board?
Great. So let's start off with maybe calling out why this book needs to be out there. And I'm going to borrow from maybe a religious parallel here, because I felt like I was reading about original sin. So for anybody who doesn't know, original sin is this idea that, way back when a dude and a gal bit into a piece of fruit and you are now screwed because of that. You have been brought into a system which you may or may not realize is a bad system. And what I'm talking about there is, I think, and I'm speaking to anybody who's, maybe if you've been in marketing for 50 plus years, you would see different. But for any of us who have not been in it that long, what we don't even realize is that we've been hoarding data and we've been doing it without consent. We've been abusing it without any framework to give us a better use of it. And yeah, we've been doing it wrong. Would you disagree?
No, not at all. Completely agree. And for many folks, they don't even necessarily recognize that they're doing those things wrongly.
Right. Right.
And until more recently, consumers haven't had that awareness. And that's really the root of the shift is awareness, first starting with the consumers, and then most marketers are like, oh no, I'm using these platforms that are doing these things that are not aligned with expectations or aligned with what people would be comfortable with at the end of the day. And that's really what's necessitating this change. And thus the book, trying to help people through that shift.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if we maybe take this 50-year, period that I'm talking about, where we might put ourselves is if this were a pendulum, the pendulum has been way over on the side of collecting more information than we have a right to, and not using it in a way that demonstrates to a customer that we value their relationship.
Yep.
It's coming back though, and some of that could be forced upon us by regulatory bodies, but your book argues it actually should be something we choose to do.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, absolutely. At the root of everything is really meeting and exceeding customer expectations. I mean, that's what we want to do as a business. That's what we want to do as marketers. And as those customer expectations have evolved, that, again, just necessitates that change. I don't think it was cited necessarily in the book, but some more recent research that has come out earlier this year, Google and Ipsos did a privacy by design study. And one of the key findings of that was that in the Americas, 48% of respondents said that they would choose to move to their second choice brand if that second choice brand offered a positive privacy experience compared to that first choice brand. So it's not just hey, regulators, the law says this, hey, technology's changing, we don't have access to third-party cookies and things like that. It's meeting consumers where they are, and again, just meeting and exceeding their expectations. So it's a business necessity.
For sure. So for those who aren't yet taking that drastic step of going to their second brand, though, I guess we're seeing some of them make choices which are harbingers of them perhaps making that move. Things like them installing ad blockers or
Absolutely.
moving to browsers that are more by nature uh, omitting or forgetting their interactions in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, I mean, even for folks that want to take a more, cynical view, what's in it for me as an organization, we have gotten to this point where, analytics and data is really the lifeblood of the decisions that are made within an organization. And exactly like you're saying, if you're not meeting the privacy expectations of consumers, they're going to opt out. They're going to install things like ad blockers. They're not going to provide as much information to you as a business, which then puts you at a competitive disadvantage compared with others that do have access to that data, that can then start to drive insights and really understand their consumers and preferences and all of that. So even if you want to say, hey, what's in it for me? What's in it for you is the ability to nurture those relationships, thus getting more information, more data to be able to then make better decisions.
Yeah, yeah. And this like push versus pull that we're speaking about, some of it is going to perhaps make for prickly conversations internally, even if I look at how third-party cookies have enabled us to acquire new customers using information which they didn't authorize use of to get them, and for us to get, for example, a better return on ad spend than we really should. You point out that we may need to take a bit of a hit to profitability, or to get to a new and correct equilibrium with how much we're
Yep.
paying to acquire these customers, and where. Okay, I didn't like hearing that, but what was said closely after was that if you think about it, your company has a high mission. And,
Hmm.
so this is going to be different for everyone listening, but think of whatever that highest level objective is. Now see if you can tie in a privacy centric way of dealing with your customers as a core part of that mission.
Yep, absolutely. So part of that is, just the value proposition that you are offering. So as mentioned, providing that positive privacy experience, nurturing those relationships with consumers and building trust to be able to have access to more of that data. But it's also, I wouldn't necessarily say that performance has to take a drastic hit. It's instead the ways in which we are just executing things like campaign optimization have to change.
Right.
And especially as technology is evolving and becoming more powerful, we're able to, rely on things like in-platform automation to automate at a campaign level or at a messaging level or at a creative level instead of trying to get to this, one-to-one, this person, likes this message the most. It's just looking at things and aggregating or optimizing at a little
Yes.
bit more of an aggregate level. And those
Right.
opportunities are becoming available to businesses.
Right. And we'll get into some of the tactics that come there. But your point about, yes, this isn't just going to be seen on a bottom line level. As a matter of fact, in that example that we were just talking about with the loss of cookies, you pointed out that if you do nothing right now and one day you find that, let's say, Chrome completely stops cookies, yes, it will have an absolute hit on your bottom line. But
Mhm.
what's the cost of not acting, right?
Yep.
So and you do argue that it could cost you more if you don't, because you'll be using ads indiscriminately
Yep.
and not thinking ahead to, well, if this customer wants to be messaged in this way, and I just can, capture that information and use it at the appointed time, everybody's happy.
Yeah. Exactly. One of the things you mentioned Chrome and the getting rid of the third party cookies. One thing that I find very interesting, especially when talking with folks that are very concerned about third party cookies going away, is that if you look in your analytics, for many organizations, more than half of your consumer base is already using technologies that have deprecated support for third party cookies. If they're using Safari, if they're accessing even with Chrome via an iOS device, those third party cookies are already not supported. So I'm obviously a proponent, like, you need to change, your tactics need to change. There's ways in which you should be optimizing, but if you've done absolutely nothing to date and you are seeing a similar level of performance when you're already halfway, to the cookie apocalypse, basically, hopefully that can be a little bit reassuring that it's not the end of the world. You're going to be okay. You're just at a point now where you can get better.
That's it. Don't aim for the floor, aim for the ceiling.
Yep.
So we've got that technological nudge happening. And you also point out that we have legal nudges happening. And you encourage us, when those come along, to take a mindset where we look at those as the minimum that we should strive for. Can you
Yep.
give maybe an example of how we might aim higher to, to please our customers and beat the competition rather than just going for the minimum?
Yeah, the biggest kind of area for that is around two kind of pieces: transparency and user choice. So on the user choice front, it can be difficult, depending upon where your business is located and the size of your business, even just for understanding, like, what are the requirements, for your business. And for a lot of listeners, you might probably don't meet the thresholds necessary, at least in the United States, for the state privacy legislation to even be applicable, in terms of the number of consumers from various different states for whom you're collecting information. And it's in those types of cases, even if you do meet those thresholds, where I always say, again, consumers want a very transparent and positive privacy experience. So even if it's not the legal requirement to give them total choice, or even if it's not the legal requirement to give them choice for all of the various different activities that you're doing with data, to go above and beyond and still provide that choice to consumers. If nothing else, again, so that you're able to develop that trust and mutual beneficial relationship with those consumers, and kind of get more deeper brand loyalty as a result.
Yeah. So the letter of those regulations may sound pretty dry, but if we put it in even more, if we put it in more businessy language, it could be something as simple as having the courtesy to ask, if I take this piece of information from you, may I use it in this way later?
Exactly.
So simple.
Yes. And it's also a huge opportunity for businesses, is that so many businesses don't do that piece well. The language that you just used, hey, I want to collect this information so that I can do this activity. You go to websites all the time. I'm sure you see the cookie banners. It's not asking you or telling you, hey, I'm collecting this information from you, and whatever that is, so that I can, personalize advertising for you, or so that I can personalize content on the website. It's saying we use cookies in the operation of our business. We use, targeting cookies, various different categories. Most consumers have no idea what that means. Like,
Right.
use cookies. What is that? And so being just clear, being simple, presenting it in such a way that's easily understandable for the consumer represents a huge opportunity.
I hope people heard really carefully what you just said, because there is a legal component to it, and so we could be tempted to just hand it over to a legal team or individual to write it, but that really misses the point.
Yep.
That any marketer listening to this, I hope, is understanding this is on your desk.
Yes.
You should think about, okay, I have this opportunity. I could do some amazing things if I had
Yes.
this information and the right to use it. So I've got to take advantage of that.
Yep. Absolutely. And the kind of other ironic thing is, we work with a lot of compliance departments as well, helping them to understand the business side, the marketing side. And especially in the United States, your requirements for transparency, your requirements for user choice are related to what you're using information for, not the cookies that you're setting on a browser. That's a European privacy directive requirement. And so many, even just organizations that will use a consent management platform and then just use default language that's in there, it speaks to cookies. So not only are you delivering a poor consumer experience, you're also not even adhering to the requirements of your compliance
Yikes.
requirements as well. So it's interesting. We do hear that feedback sometimes that, hey, I just need to check these boxes. Well, no, put this into more consumable language. It's going to be a benefit for the business, and it's also going to go much further in the compliance process as well.
So are you saying that things like data portability or right to be forgotten, are those more of the American model that we need to be working on?
Yeah, those are aspects of those U.S. requirements for sure. In the U.S., it is focused more on, it's an opt-out model for user choice that are the requirements. There are some exclusions within those opt-outs for first-party uses. So your analytics data, if you're just using that to understand the performance of campaigns that you're running, if you're just using that to understand how consumers are interacting with your website, and you're not using that for targeted advertising purposes, like audience building and targeting, those things are fully allowed within the regulations. So that's where some of that nuance comes in, but also the principles in the US are much more focused on, yes, that right for deletion, access, and also interestingly, requirements for impact assessments, so like data mapping, and really importantly, data minimization, which is a concept that I think a lot of marketers don't embrace nearly to the level that they should be. Only collect and use that which is necessary for your defined business purposes, and that can simplify your architecture. That can simplify your compliance risk a lot. So yeah, those are really the areas to focus on.
Sure. And you were mentioning analytics. We're recording this in 2023, where Google Analytics 4 is the preeminent and now default Google analytics tool.
Mhm.
Wouldn't you say that it follows a data minimization philosophy where, unless you tell it to, there are many things, either pseudo-anonymous or anonymous, or even user identified, that it won't track unless you tell it to?
Yeah, in many cases, yes. And it does, GA4 does provide some additional functionality, like it doesn't store nor log IP addresses. It does have the IP anonymization on by default. There is a much more higher level, like geo lookups. So there are some protections built into the platform, absolutely. But even, think through, if you're using just out of the box GA4 and you're turning on some of that automatic enhanced tracking features, principles of data minimization, are you actually going to be using that data? Don't just check a box and turn something on and collect it because you can. Be intentful about that. And honestly, that's going to be better in your measurement strategy and your business strategy, because you're forced up front to define, what do I actually want to do with this? How am I actually using this information? And if you define that, you're much more likely to actually use it, down the line. Don't just get overwhelmed with, oh, I have all this, what should I be doing? Be intentful with everything you do.
That's right. So we've kind of talked about some of the things that we would want to implement, but the book doesn't stop there. It actually goes through a pathway that you can follow to actually carry it through. And I want to get into that, but before we do that, we're going to take a really short break. Do you have a lot of company data in reach, but struggle to get useful business insights out of it? Do you open up your Google Analytics but find you're at a loss on how to get it reporting the way you want? Do you wonder what new marketing strategies you could leverage if you could just unlock what's in your data? If you said yes, then you sound just like other clients did when they started working with me. Many B2B companies who I've done project work with have been helped by modernizing their analytics. Should you be ready to begin a project, let's talk about what you would like your analytics to do for you. Please reach out today via the podcast feedback channels or connect with me, Hey Glenn S, 2 N's on Glenn, on either Twitter or Instagram. Or search up Marketing Analytics People on LinkedIn. I'm usually the first Glenn that pops up. Okay, let's get back to the show. All right, Lucas, we have heard about why we would want to do this, but when we get into the how, where I'd like to take this is we look at the customer journey, and the book urges us to, take, and we're not going to quibble over different models that people have, but if we look at a simple, we have the activation of someone's, information being shared with us, and then there's enablement of that information, and then there's finally acquisition. This continuum that we're going across, you urge us to look at it in that order, which actually goes backwards to the way that a customer normally follows. They normally first are, finding out about us, and then they make the decision to be, a customer. Once we acquire them, then we start to get to know them better, and then finally we use that information back and forth with them. Why this order? What's the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, I think, at least for me, conceptualizing things, as well as even talking about it through with organizations, thinking about it instead of like the customer acquisition lifecycle, instead thinking about it through the lens of like the data acquisition lifecycle. So again, that point of collection, once you're already interacting with them, and then the activation, or really the enhancement, storage and enhancement, and then that activation piece. So flipping it in that way, I think when we think through it in that data lifecycle, kind of perspective. It's just a little bit easier when thinking about, road mapping. What is it that our organization should be prioritizing in order to be able to bring this to life? So I think that's really the reason for putting in that order.
Sure. And when we take all of those parts into account, we're probably looking at a big swath of our organization as far as whose systems that information is sitting in and who we need to involve if we're going to get more privacy centric.
Exactly.
You do talk about organizing the people. Can you tell us a little bit about how you encourage them to get organized so that all the stakeholders are at the table?
Yeah, it's that point that's critical. For different organizations, you're going to have different stakeholders,
Yep.
depending upon the size of the organization. A large enterprise is going to have all kinds of different roles. A small business might just be the founder. It might just be the analyst. But when you're walking your data through that life cycle, understanding what are the different component parts of the organization that touches the data, essentially. And then making sure that there is a representative from each of those areas that are involved with, the discussions and the strategy around privacy centricity, data strategy. So it's kind of simplified. Oftentimes we're talking about whoever it is that's responsible for the architecture, so engineering, the folks on the analytics team, so those that are responsible for kind of generating insights, creating insights, the folks on the business team, so often marketing, that are tasked with what is it that we're doing with those insights, how is it that we're actually using the information, and then also folks on the media and advertising side that are going to be tasked with targeting, acquiring new consumers. So that's kind of the typical group that's going to be in the room. But again, it's going to differ by organization for kind of who that is, how many hats there actually are.
Right.
Some folks are going to be wearing multiple hats, but it's critical. And I can't believe I almost forgot the legal folks or whoever it is that has
Sure.
that legal knowledge also. So just being able to have all those perspectives there is really important.
In larger organizations, you even term it as like a council.
Yes.
And I like that visual. But who should lead it? My experience with committees is that they're really good for bouncing ideas around, but when it comes to actually getting stuff done, they're not the ones to entrust that to. Who's going to lead this? Who do you think should lead this?
It's an excellent question because yes, if there is not someone that is this is the person that's leading, and I've seen it many times with these types of councils, it becomes kind of a game of hot potato.
Or here we are again. Didn't we already discuss this?
Yes. What I've seen is most effective is the marketing and the business teams, because they're ultimately responsible for the business strategy. So what is it that we're executing? How is it that we're going to go about executing? And they're the ones that are going to be bringing that what to the table, right? So they bring the what is it that we're doing? What is the initiative? The folks that are bringing that to the table, then engineering is going to say, okay, this is how we would go about doing it for collecting the data. Analysts are going to say, okay, this is the data that we would need. Legal is going to say, okay, these are the requirements, that you're going to have, the guidelines that you're going to have to work within. But ultimately, it's, what is the outcome that we're trying to achieve? And whoever is responsible for that business outcome, kind of sitting at the head of the table, shall we say, is most effective.
For sure. And then, of course, when we do the comparison between what we want to have and what we actually have, we find some pretty massive gaps.
Yes.
Do you encourage people to try and take them on all at once, or should we try to parse them into things we want to get done right away versus longer term?
Yeah, this is where in the book we talk about kind of defining a roadmap. And so taking that first step of understanding what is your current state, and maybe that roadmap is in terms of the initiatives. So today we are super reliant on XYZ marketing channels or XYZ ways of creating audiences to target users in order to be able to drive new user acquisition. And then taking that step back and understanding which of those different tactics are, maybe not aligned with consumer expectations, or are using technologies like third-party cookies that are going away. So where are those risks? And that's where you're going to get that, laundry list of these are all the things that we want to accomplish or need to accomplish. And from there, what I would say, prioritize those things. But one of the things that becomes really apparent when you're working with, especially data and even on the compliance side, there's tons of overlap. Maybe in order to be able to better understand or segment your consumers for a personalization effort, those same segments are going to be used for audience creation.
Yep.
So, then going through and defining, all right, in order to be able to effectively segment along, the ways in which we want to, we require XYZ data. Yeah, there's two different use cases for that, but your legal requirements are going to be quite similar. The architecture still needs to be there for giving users the choice of, yes, I'm cool with this activity, but I'm not cool with that activity. And so it becomes really cohesive once you're able to really lay it all out. And that's where I think getting that visibility up front and going through that type of an exercise pays so many dividends really moving forward.
Yes, if you can overcome the initial resistance, much like I'm thinking about doing spring cleaning around my house, I'm not looking forward to it. But if you get over that hump and you start to say, wait a minute, our architecture has redundancy all over the place.
Yep.
We could actually streamline things here. This is good all around. Right. Then you can start to see stakeholders leaning into it and pursuing the kind of the positive side of this, not just we're avoiding a negative.
Yep. It's funny that you use the cleaning kind of parallel there. I used to always use that metaphor like 5, 6, 7 years ago when trying to convince organizations to implement a data layer on their website,
Right.
for analytics purposes. And so it was always like, okay, get everything organized and all of your tools, ready to be used. And then as soon as different tasks come up, they're there, they're ready for you. You know exactly where that, those data points are. And this is very similar, right? You're defining the data that you need. With privacy-centric marketing, you're just taking that one step further and defining what is the outcome, and can I use these different things, and is it aligned with my consumers' privacy expectations to use these different data points for those same outcomes. So I think that there are a lot of parallels, and for everyone in the industry, most people that have probably gone through that process already for defining and creating a data layer. You got through that. You can get through this. It's just kind of an updated, extended kind of initiative.
I love it, and I think it, maybe mixing metaphors, but instead of thinking of privacy as a hard stop to a practice, instead what you're kind of saying is it's more like a traffic light or a gate. Like, okay, I'm on the way to delivering this client value. I'm just going to pause and see if I'm doing it in a privacy conscious way. Yes, I am. Green light. Go ahead.
Yep, exactly. And if there might be some, legal considerations and whatnot, making sure that those are taken into account.
Right.
But yes, none of these things are in most of the activities that most advertisers are doing. There's no hard no, as a result of these changes. It's simply saying like, okay, we want to still do this thing. One of the statistics, I think you used it in the book, but again, in some research that was done last year, over 90% of consumers say that they are more likely to shop with brands that provide offers and recommendations that are relevant to them. So while, yes, we talked about, consumers are willing to switch brands if offered a better privacy experience,
it goes the other way.
Exactly, of ad blockers is super high. ATT opt-in rates are oftentimes 25, 30%.
Yeah.
So yes, consumers are more restrictive, but at the same time, they have the same and even heightened expectations for the things which require the same personal information that we're talking about. So
Yeah. They
it's
come to
still,
expect it. Yeah.
exactly. And so in order to meet that expectation, it's just take that step back and make sure that, am I doing this in a transparent way that my consumers are comfortable with, that meets and exceeds their privacy expectations, and that's really just being more conscious about the activities that we're doing.
Right. Let's take just a quick little detour into a slightly more technical part of this, which is where that data is residing. The past 10 years at least, have been habituated to buying a SaaS tool and simply turning it on, paying our subscription. And now you're asking us to kind of review, well, where's our information sitting? And in
Yeah.
some cases, it goes behind that fogged glass, out into, well, I don't know where they put that. I don't know where those servers reside.
Mhm.
I don't know if those are the same jurisdictions that my clients are in, etc. One way that we've been seeing a change is that more companies are investing in a private cloud platform. So this
Yep.
would be, AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, etc. Do you see, like, I'm sure there's not a hard and fast rule, but do you see things getting less complicated when a company, as it's thinking about streamlining its architecture, says, well, hey, if we start to consolidate it into a cloud platform that we control, then a few of those puzzling issues go away?
Absolutely. And it's an architecture and a concept that we're a big proponent of. One of the kind of primary pillars that we talk about in the book is first party ownership of first party data. First party data in this privacy kind of focused environment is incredibly important. It's the most valuable resource that you have. And so while in the past, yes, we're taking our first party data and we're just sending it over to third parties, you lose that ownership. So you don't have control over where it resides. You could lose access realistically to that data at any point. And so one of the things is kind of technology has evolved is exactly kind of what you're mentioning, storing at least some of your behavioral data from your websites and trying to ingest even the data that you have within media platforms. We often don't think about like, oh, my campaign data that's sitting in search ads. That's your data. Just because it resides there and you're running campaigns there, you're still the ones that are paying for the campaigns. You're still the ones that are paying for the actions that are generating that data. So how do we claw kind of that back into our own environment as well? Not to get too into like the architecture, but some of the technologies, especially with server-side tag management and server-side data distribution, are making this process so much easier. And so if you stand up server-side tag management, you are sending data from your website to your own owned server endpoint. And what that then allows you to do is control exactly what data goes where. So you're able to better respond to compliance requirements. If IP address is considered personal data by your legal team in Germany, and you don't want that going to Google Analytics, you don't have to send IP address there.
Yeah.
So you can limit what data is sent where, but at the same time, you can also stream that data directly into your own, BigQuery instance, your own AWS instance, your own Azure instance. And so you have, with that behavioral kind of, data model, you have all of your interaction data. So now if you start importing in, say, your campaign performance information from search ads or from whatever display platform that you're using, well, now you can start doing your own attribution analysis. You can start doing your own really advanced modeling with all that first party data, and you're not reliant on those third party platforms, which, by the way, have access to less signals because of the technical browser restrictions that are being introduced. So the insights they're able to provide are even more limited.
Yeah. This is just fascinating. I'm really glad you brought it up. It's counterintuitive. And I say this as a marketer who probably has gone kicking and screaming whenever things that are highly technical in nature pop up. You know,
Yeah.
I think the first time I saw SQL, I probably broke out in hives. So, but you use the word easier when it comes to
Mhm.
things like this, and you tell me if I'm right here. But I think what you meant by that was if you've got APIs going everywhere back and forth to try and uh, close loops with
Mhm.
information that is sitting outside of your area,
Yeah.
and you're just running around like a hamster on a wheel managing that, while you would have to get a developer involved to set up some stuff that's server side, to set up that cloud instance. You are bringing that data inside of your own jurisdiction,
Yeah.
and that gives us more sovereignty over it. And
Yeah.
we can then, like, that's what you meant, I think, by easier, which is things like, are we ready to upgrade or deploy that consent management tool?
Mhm.
Absolutely. Why? Because when they ask for that one thing to be in their specific setting,
Yeah.
we can now do that. It would have been way harder to do it in the old regime where everything's federated
Mhm.
or decentralized.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I shouldn't use the term easier in such a general sense. There is, at least as of today, when we're talking here in August 2023, it is still more of an engineering overhead, in order to be able to set up the architecture. So the architecture itself is not easier, but the kind of opportunities that it unlocks make it easier in order to be able to kind of activate it in those various different ways. And that's the increase or the opening up of opportunities is what's super important, because innovation in the marketing technology space, in the marketing architecture space, is happening to be able to lower that barrier to entry to allow organizations to stand up this architecture. So, for example, server-side tag management. Um, about, I think, 5 years ago, some of our engineers stood up essentially what was server-side data distribution for a client website. That was all custom, all using individual platform APIs, all, so super engineering heavy. Fast forward to today, Google server-side Google Tag Manager, along with other platforms like RudderStack and Telium as a solution
Yep,
and some
yep.
others. But all of those, they have user interfaces. Server-side GTM, their UI for server-side tag management mirrors that of client-side. So yeah, take some effort to be able to stand up your server environment to be able to stand up the endpoint and everything. But once you're through that, which there's guides, there's tons of support that's available out there, tons of organizations that offer that support, including InfoTrust. But once you get that stood up, the management kind of moving forward is becoming easier by the month.
Yeah. And let's not forget that data stacks do require regular upkeep. So if someone is, I don't want to pick on it, but if they're using, let's say, a Acton or Goldmine as their CRM, and
Yeah.
they're on a really old version of a marketing automation platform or a tag manager, please don't take what Lucas is saying as, okay, this is hard because he's asking us to do engineering, things that are hard from an engineering standpoint. You may also have issues that you should have fixed by now.
Yeah.
If you go ahead and fix those things, for example, if your stack is robust enough to include a CDP, many of these newer tools are geared for the types of things you've just talked about. So uh, please be aware that from your vantage point, it may seem like a far way away, but if you have a modern stack, it's probably you're probably closer than you think.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that is one important thing to mention. I mentioned the concept of data minimization before. You can even apply that again to your technology stack. think about what is it that you're actually doing with data. If all you're doing on your website is, you've got a Google Analytics instance running, you're understanding kind of traffic patterns or, how some campaigns are performing, you're just running some search ads, it probably doesn't make sense to stand up, like a server-side architecture in your own marketing data warehouse. So for sure, kind of think through that. I think too often in the marketing advertising technology space, people just start espousing like, hey, you have to be using this. No, not everything is, worthwhile for every organization. But, if you are on that more kind of sophisticated side, you are running campaigns across multiple channels, you are doing or considering doing any level of personalization on your sites or in your targeting, then that type of architecture is going to open tons of doors for you here moving forward in the ways that you will be able to activate come a year from now.
Right. The activation piece that you'd mentioned a few moments ago, for those who have sophisticated needs, this can open up some really wild possibilities. Would could you give some examples, or do you agree with me that in some cases a company may even find that they have the possibility of a new product on their hands, or that the data that they have on their customers mingled together with second party data, like you said, with other platforms? This is really taking it up a notch as far as what the customer believes they're getting from dealing with that company.
Absolutely. And that's our third pillar, driving and making decisions from insights and understanding. So standing up that first party owns first party data architecture is what opens those doors in order to be able to get to those deeper insights. Now, if you start, pulling in your behavioral data and streaming that directly to, say, a BigQuery instance, while at the same time you are importing in information from your CRM system, and you're using a common user identifier for anyone that is logged in and consenting to the collection of that data. Well, now within that same platform, you've got an integrated data set with a lot of information that you have gathered across various different touch points and across various different potentially properties that your brand has, that you can then drive that segmentation and then start analyzing behavior, analyzing the performance of campaigns, analyzing the return on the targeting of a particular audience cohort, potentially through the lens of those segments. So now we're talking about optimizing for customer lifetime value, and what are the marketing channels within which I'm activating within that are giving me the greatest return for that high value customer segment. A lot of these things were and still are very difficult, especially in a cross-channel context. But that type of a first-party data architecture just, again, unlocks all of that ability for activation.
I'll double down on that. I think it does it in a cost-efficient way. Companies who've looked at, for example, intent-based databases or ABM software, have probably shied away because of the high price tag. What you've just described there, tell me if I'm wrong, you might be able to get most of the value that you would have had to buy out of that platform with what you have in-house.
Yep, absolutely. And one of the things also within these cloud platforms, for example, use Google Cloud Platform, they have all of these, everyone talks about AI and advanced modeling and things like that. They have pre-built models that you can just drop on top of your data within those platforms. So, getting it all into that one place, again, hey, I'm looking for a personalization engine, instead of having to go and invest in a tool, get the data into that tool. Well, now you're talking about pre-built models that are just there available for you within these platforms that you can start dropping on top of your data sets and then starting to execute on those initiatives.
Yeah, there's a lot of new things that I don't think it's possible for a marketer to get fatigued from the possibilities. They should be doing this, and I think privacy is, I'm hoping that what we've done today is put it in a positive lens for them so that they can see what's possible instead of just seeing it more as a road bump.
Yep, absolutely. There's a massive opportunity out there.
Right. Lucas, if people want to find the book or find out how to get in touch with you or some of your colleagues who co-wrote it, where would you send them?
Yes, so the book is available on Amazon, Crawl, Walk, Run, Becoming a Privacy-Centric Marketing Organization. I, along with my colleagues that wrote it, we work with InfoTrust. Catch other content that we have, constantly writing content on these topics that goes up on that website. Subscribe to the blog and everything there. There's also companion resources on the InfoTrust website related to the book. You can find that even without purchasing. Yes, we'll have a link. You can find that. Within some of those resources, there is the ability also to submit for a high-level strategic risk assessment. So some of those things that I talked about earlier, for just trying to outline, hey, what am I doing now, and what type of risk do I face due to the changing privacy landscape? Definitely submit for that as well. If you want to speak with me, definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn, Lucas Long, or just through the website. Love these conversations.
That comes through really clearly. I'm so glad you came on. You definitely gave our listeners a way to evaluate how this is all happening so that they can make it even better.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter @FunnelReboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.